Now, have you ever thought of sending a threat via a WhatsApp or a text message, or considered sending intimate pictures of someone without their consent? Well, think again. A new cybercrime bill has been passed in Parliament, and anyone disclosing intimate messages, sending threats, or sending messages with an intention to cause damage will now face the full might of the law. Now, for more on this, I'm joined by Brian Pinnock, a cybersecurity specialist. A very good afternoon to you, Brian, and thank you very much for your time. Now, it's all good and well, I guess, Brian, to pass a bill, in looking to make sure that cybercrime does not happen and that people's privacy and intimacy is well protected. But implementation is always important. How will this be implemented?
Good afternoon. Yes, I think that's a really, really good question. I think one of the things we do in South Africa really well is create legislation. And the other thing that we don't do so well is actually create the structures and systems and organizations to make sure that that happens. I think we are moving in the right direction, though. We've got a couple of new pieces of legislation that are going to start impacting South Africans and South African companies in general. One of them is the Cybercrimes Act, once it's actually signed into law by the President. And it's going to put a lot of pressure on organizations, particularly internet service providers and telecommunications providers and financial services companies, but companies in general. So I think we're going to start seeing a movement in the right direction.
Now, I don't know how many times, Brian, I've seen on social media, and I would even go as far as specifying Twitter, how, people's private messages are put on there, whether it is by malice or just because people think that it's something that's funny, So I suppose the question becomes, how far do we go in terms of educating people who are using social media to not do this before we, have them face the full might of the law? Because they might be thinking that what they're doing is actually not wrong because everybody else seems to be catching the joke.
I think you're absolutely right. That's going to be one of the really, really big challenges that we're seeing. Cybercrime in all its forms is so rife. The Mimecast Threat Intelligence Center seeing all kinds of cybercrime. So things that don't even seem like crimes, things like sending malicious communications of some kind, maybe sending somebody a threat on social media. All of those kind of fairly seemingly trivial type things are actually going to be criminalized under this new law. And I think it's going to be very, very challenging for individuals to actually realize that, your kind of average day on Twitter would be, potentially inciting someone, damage to someone's property, even if you're kind of doing it, in terms of what you see as something good. Maybe you see yourself as a social justice warrior of some kind and you want to sort of incite some kind of negative reaction against someone that you disagree with. Some of those things, depending on how far you go, are going to actually become crimes under which you're going to either pay a fine or potentially actually spend time in jail, depending on how severe it is.
How big of a issue is cybercrime in this country? I mean, someone would say, well, they've just passed a bill, so that should answer your question. But exactly how big of a problem is this in South Africa?
So there's two kind of ways of looking at cybercrime in South Africa. We're actually a hotspot for cybercrime, both for sort of what I'll call inbound cybercrime, which is the one aspect, where we're seeing all kinds of various things which the Cybercrime Bill now addresses, various kinds of fraud. So cyber fraud, cyber forgery, what sort of the legal term is cyber uttering. We see all of that kind of stuff directed at South African citizens. But equally, we're actually a bit of an outbound destination as well, in a sense, for cybercrime. And that's something that not a lot of people are aware of. And it's a challenge that we need to address, which is why the Cybercrime Bill is actually here. Is South Africa is starting to get a reputation, a little bit like what some of the West African countries have got, as being a kind of a hotbed of cybercrime directed at other countries in the world. We almost have that kind of call center mindset where criminal organizations are using South Africans, and because of the fact that our laws, not that our laws have been weak, but they just haven't been that specific about what actual things constitute a cybercrime and, giving guidance to various forms of law enforcement. Now all of that is just about to fall in place. And I think that's a really good thing because South Africa has actually been under the spotlight as a country which hasn't really been seen as being hard on cybercrime until now.
And just quickly before I let you go, Brian, I want to go back to the question of implementation. Does our country have capacity to ensure that we do combat cybercrime? And by capacity, I'm asking, do they have institutions that they can go to? That's government, of course. Do they have institutions that they can go to get help to make sure that cybercrime is fought?
I think we absolutely have to. I don't think we really have a choice. Previously, we've had no formative legislation around, forcing banks and critical infrastructure institutions like Transnet, Eskom, etc., to do the right thing. So I think we're going to see it's going to be a combination of private and public sector. I think there are definitely going to be hiccups. Some of the right structures are in place, but I think it's definitely going to be a work in progress, but one that's absolutely essential that we get right.
Right. Brian, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That is Brian Pinocchio, is a cybersecurity specialist.